You know, WBOC's chief meteorologist, Dan Satterfield, he's just such a cool dude. If you ever sit down to have a conversation with him, you realize that he knows so much about so many different things.
He really does. And actually, did you know that Dan wears a yellow tie every Friday? Because he says yellow flies on Friday, and well, Friday is the best day of the week. There are a lot of other things you may not know about Dan Satterfield, so DelmarvaLife Sean Stryker sat down with him for today's Know Your Neighbor segment.
Well, the weather here on Delmarva can change at the drop of a hat, and the man tasked with the responsibility of trying to predict that weather here at WBOC is Chief Meteorologist Dan Satterfield. Dan, thanks for joining me.
Sure, Sean.
So you're from Oklahoma.
That's right.
That's just nowhere near Delmarva, nowhere near Maryland.
There's a lot of meteorologists come out of Oklahoma because the weather can be pretty wild there, and just where I grew up, and so I was lucky enough to live in a state that had a school that had an atmospheric physics department. The University of Oklahoma was one of two back in the 70s that really had decent atmospheric science departments.
You actually got your master's.
Did a master's in earth science at Mississippi State while I was working in Alabama, and I did that because I wanted to understand more about geology, astronomy, because most of the time, if you're working as a meteorologist at a TV station, you're the only person who knows anything about science in that newsroom. So if anything like that happens, they come over to your desk. What is this? You know,
and you need to know the answer.
Exactly, at least, or enough to know I don't know the answer. I need to call someone who does. You know,
the love of science has brought you a lot of cool places, and I was reading one of the coolest, in my opinion, was the South Pole.
Yeah, the National Science Foundation invited me to go down in 2010 to see the science down there. They took me down to Antarctica for 10 days. I spent a few nights in McMurdo, flew into the South Pole, and let me tell you, the South Pole is a different spot. It's like being on another planet. It really is.
I can't even imagine what that's like.
The South Pole is actually at about 11,000 feet. You're standing on top of 2 miles of ice.
Wow.
So when I walked off the aircraft, the temperature was about 25 below, and that's a warm day. It was midsummer. The wind was blowing at about 40, and the wind chill was 50 below zero. And again, there were people who'd been there for a while, and they were walking around in just jackets,
so
because to them that was a nice day.
Yeah, that was a nice day for them.
Yeah.
So after visiting Antarctica, and you went to Greenland.
Right, just 6 months later, they were drilling to get an ice core all the way through to the bedrock in Greenland. And Greenland's about a mile and a half worth of ice sitting up there. And if you drill through the ice and you get a core, you can actually melt a little of that ice and tell what the temperature was at the time that snow fell on the planet.
Wow.
And I got to go up there and spend 2 weeks with them as they pulled up that final core of ice. And I was actually down there when they pulled up the drill. It had a chunk of rock in it that said, "We've done it, we're at the bottom."
Well, after visiting places like that, and I know you've worked at a couple of different stations, I'm wondering, how did you end up here on Delmarva?
Well, my best news director I ever worked for was the general manager of this place. Okay. And he called me. I was going to take some time off, go back to Oklahoma for a while, and he called me and said, "I need a meteorologist." Well, any meteorologist knows that the Delmarva Peninsula is a really interesting place to forecast. On a normal day, I'm forecasting a temperature of maybe 64 in Ocean City and 90 in Easton. And that's a tough thing, and it's a challenge, and that's what makes it fun.
So I know you have a couple hobbies other than science and away from the station. Photography is one of them.
Photography is really my only other hobby, and my wife says all of our vacation pictures are of clouds, but it's not quite true. But yeah, and this is a wonderful place to take photos. I mean, I love to get ocean, land, sky, the wetlands here on Delmarva. Not only are they biologically wonderful places, but they're beautiful.
So I want to wrap things up
Sure.
with 3 kind of rapid fire questions.
Okay.
If you could have a rainy day, a sunny day, or a snowy day, which would you
snow
have?
for sure.
That's what you're saying. You're a snow guy.
Yeah, and then would come second would be a good rainy day.
So the next one's based on photography. If you could photograph any person, place, thing, what would it be?
The colors of the icebergs in Greenland and off the coast of Greenland do not really show up well in photography. The colors are amazing, this beautiful blue, and I would love to somehow try to capture them better.
So if you weren't in meteorology, if we're going to take photography out of the picture, out of the question
I know what you're
here,
going to ask, and I
what
have
would
the
it
answer. When I did my master's, I was with some science teachers, and they all sat me down and said, "You need to quit television and become a teacher." I think I would teach. I love teaching science, and there's nothing better in the world than a great teacher, and nothing so poor as a bad one.
I think, Dan, I just learned a year's worth of science by sitting for a couple minutes here with you. But thanks so much for sharing some information about yourself And guys, I learned a lot about Dan Satterfield, Steve Hammond, Alice Davis, and Paul Butler. I just can't wait to hear and learn about who I'm sitting down with next. Jimmy and Lisa, back to you guys.
What an amazing,
Yeah.
not just that one, but a series of things. Obviously, he talked to him not on a Friday because he had a red tie on.
He had a red tie on, yeah.
But now that you've learned a little bit more about WBOC's Dan Satterfield, let's get to know a little bit more about a few of our country music superstar duets. Still ahead, the ACM picks for the best country duos.
And speaking of great duos, no, not Jimmy and I. We also have two things you'd never suspect would be so good together. Up next, we're in the kitchen making springtime cocktails. DelmarvaLife, we'll be right back.